This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Hey, business storytellers, episode 671. We're talking about accessibility today. And you know what? I ran into so many cases where people just didn't think about accessibility. Something isn't working, something is too small to read, or you can't use a screen reader, for example. People do that. And there's probably a gazillion other things that are happening on where people are not thinking about accessibility in their marketing. And why is that happening? Instead of me just guessing, I asked Donna Bungard to come on the show. She's with Indeed.com, and she's an expert on the topic of accessibility. So let's get the scoop from her. What is going on? Why are people not thinking about it? And why should they? Donna, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Nice to see you. Really glad we connected. I think I heard you on another show, on another podcast. I don't remember where it was, but it was a couple months ago. And very, you obviously know the topic. But why do other people ignore it? Why do we still have to talk about accessibility? Shouldn't it be just like table stakes, honestly?
You know, those of us who focus on it a lot would think that is, oh, this is normal. I grew up in a household where everyone had a disability of one kind or another, so it was always normal. Why isn't this normal? It is normal. So what we're finding though is that society for history, like lots and lots of years, would always hide people with disabilities, whether it be that they'd hide their own disability for fear of stigma, or they'd hide family members and not talk about it. It would all be very quiet and hush hush. So there's that kind of cultural stigma against talking about it and thinking about it. And when we don't talk and think about it, it kind of gets left out of the process. It's something that people realize after, oh, I should have done that, because we're not having these conversations. We're not, disability is already normal. So we're not normalizing in our conversations, in our societies, in our workplaces, in our marketing. And that's why it gets overlooked. There's nobody in a back room with them twirling their mustache. It's just a series of cultural and personal things that have built up where it's typically, just not at the front of mind unless somebody's there to make it intentionally at front of mind.
Well, and even once you catch it, you kind of have to have a certain level of empathy, I guess, right? I mean, for example, when I was looking, and I don't know if that's officially an accessibility issue, or maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it's definitely it was an issue to me. So I was shopping for some lights, lighting for a house, and I went into one of those lighting stores, and even though I got a light on my face right now, they had all these lights, everywhere, lights, and I almost passed out. I was like, oh my God, I can't see anything. Don't even ask me about which light fixture I like. I can't even see the light fixture because you just basically rammed me in the face with all this light, right? The light sensitivity. And when I brought that up, people were just like, oh, which one would you like to look at? Do you know what I mean? Like, it didn't even make any difference that I just said that, and I'm not sure what the solution would be. But that's kind of like, when you were just talking about that, that's kind of what came top to my mind. Like, how do you adjust? How do you understand what's going on? And then how do you move forward as a company to kind of be a little bit more inclusive than that?
Well, I always say it starts with a conversation. The example you said was a prime example of a sensory overload. Anybody can experience that. It's more prominent in some neurodivergent or some disabled experiences, lived experiences than others. But anyone can experience that moment of, oh my gosh, too much. And when somebody just says, no, well, okay, which one do you want? The conversation is, I can't see them in this experience. Can we shut some off? And maybe I can tell you. And it doesn't have to be hard or rude. I was one time talking to an events team, and the kind of tagline of our whole planning experience was, where would Sparky sit? Because this team came to me with this incredible seating and staging example. and it was beautiful. But I'm like, okay, if somebody shows up with a 70-pound lab service animal, where's Sparky? I just made up this fictional dog. Where does Sparky going to sit? And somebody went, oh. And then we started talking through the use cases, talking through the other reasons that tighter seating would be uncomfortable or exclusive. Why other, there was no railing on a particular example mock-up that was being shown. Why that was a problem. And we just started talking through the lived experiences. And everyone was very receptive in that case. It wasn't your experience. But at the same account, we just talked it through. And then in the workplace, when we're thinking about it, when we're thinking about our marketing, lean on employee resource groups or ERGs. Ask people what they think. Ask your internal experts what they think if you have them available. Ask people to think about, okay, what would this be like? And then I'm a huge personal fan of, I read all the time, or actually, for nonfiction, I usually listen to audiobooks on 2x because that's just how my brain works. But I'm hugely into reading books about various lived experiences with disability to make me think, okay, wait a second, that's not my lived experience. So I need to understand theirs a little bit to try to look for pitfalls that I wouldn't be aware of otherwise. I mean, do you have any people you follow or any books you read?
Yeah, I read plenty of books, but the one thing, I don't read books on that topic necessarily, but that's a really good idea, actually. And I got to think about for what use cases I would have to do that. Like, where does it make the most sense in my job? Because here's an example that is completely in line with what I do, which is marketing, content marketing, digital things. And I never thought about screen readers. But so I looked at this website and I ran it through a screen reader, never thought about it. And what happened? What happened is it couldn't read the text. And all I heard, like, it was like, that song, RESPECT, it was spelling every word, and it's some HTML issue. And the screen reader can't figure it out because it's not coded correctly. But how would I ever think about that if that's not top of mind? Now, I think here's my answer. My answer is it's like search engine optimization. Just do the best practice. Don't mess with it. If you need to have an H1 on the top of the page, you should have an H1. That's an accessibility thing too, right? So you can figure out the structure of the page. Why do people mess with it? Like, just do the basic foundational things on some of those, so then we can focus on some of the other things. Now, my question for you though is, so I go into a store. I mean, first of all, I don't blame them that they can't turn the lights off because I'm not the only person there. But the person I'm talking to, they're not actually the person that can fix the problem, right? I mean, I was like, I switched internet the other day, and this older gentleman was talking to the cashier or whatever, and was basically giving him like a spiel about the cost and whatever. But that cashier doesn't have any influence on anything. He's just taking the payment. So, like, how do you get the message to the right people and have it have an impact?
You talk about the larger impact, truth be told. The updated CDC here in the US rates said that I believe we're up to 28.9%, or no, 28.7% of the US identifies with a disability. The EU recently released statistics showing 27% of the population identifies with a disability. When you're talking about potentially excluding nearly 30% of your consumer base, and then if we take into account the friends, the families, the partners, um, the parents, the children of people with disabilities who may not identify with the disability themselves, we're talking, I forget the number I read the other day. It was trillions of dollars of market value within the larger disability community. And when I say larger disability community, I mean those partners and children and parents and friends and sometimes colleagues. I'm talking about those larger people who have learned to notice, who have learned to pick up on, oh, wait, this is this is not inclusive. So when you start looking at that overall market value, when you start looking at the statistics of more than 1 billion people, and when you start looking at the impact that that population has, and frankly, the intersectionality of that population, because people of any other underrepresented group can become disabled at any time. Some always, have disabilities from birth, some acquire them later, but it does not matter what gender you identify with, what racial or ethnic backgrounds, and any of the other underrepresented groups. Anyone can be disabled. Therefore, that intersectional experience, that understanding how those mixes of social identities impact things, you're talking about an enormous market value just by being inclusive. Not to mention that there are legal stipulations in the US. We have the ADA over in Europe. The EAA is coming out, which is going to have huge business impact. There's a huge, huge business case. And what it comes down to is recognizing the market value, recognizing the potential risk factors, and then leaning into educating your teams. And that has to happen both bottom up and top down. This can't be any one group saying, this is something we should do. This has to be a cultural movement within your organization, and it's to drive awareness, drive understanding, and really get the market value of this group.
When you say the market value, it's kind of interesting, right? Because we're trying to quantify everything, right? Like, and you threw out some numbers. And I'm thinking, like, how many people are actually, so that might be the estimate, but then how many people are actually not counted? Because, so for example, you mentioned, like, you kind of gave a quick diagnosis of what was going on with me, totally on point. But I actually never had like a formal diagnosis for that. I mean, I know that's a thing for me, but like, in certain pieces of that, but like I never actually, like, I'm probably not part of that number officially, but maybe I am for certain things, right? Not everything. So how do you? I mean, like the number has to be huge. I mean, it's like companies. I mean, have to be losing even way more money on that. But how do they? Um, how do they even prioritize, or how do they even know? How do they? Is it really just about doing research, talking to people, training people on the front end, or I mean, you know what I mean? It's just like there's so many different things that can keep coming up. And is there new disabilities that we didn't know about? Does that come up at times, or is that's not a thing?
You bring up 3 fantastic points. I'm gonna kinda take them in the, reverse order, I think. In terms of new disabilities, well, we're always learning. We're always learning how people think, how people process, how bodies work. Um, and truth be told, long COVID is a new disability. And the world in the state of it as it is, we are seeing mass disabling events happening all over the world. So there's reasons these numbers are increasing that are beyond the fact that diagnostics has changed. What you said about people, I'm going to jump around a bit. People who may be not counted, you're absolutely right. Those who have been identified as female at birth and those for underrepresented racial groups or ethnic groups have a history of not being diagnosed or diagnosed as being a behavioral problem instead of somebody with a disability who just needed an accommodation. It's tragic in some cases and frustrating in lesser ones. For example, I was coded as learning disabled. Well, originally tested in the late 80s. We waited for the ADA in the early 90s. I actually don't know what flavor of neurodivergence I really am. I call myself mysteriously neurodivergent because I don't have the label. They just saw a female identified at birth who was thinking differently and were like, oh, yeah, something's up with this one. So they coded me. But we really don't know what flavor or whatever it is. So even I, who work in this field, always look at that checkbox and go, am I disabled enough to count? And yes, I am. I have needs. I need them met. Check the box, move on with life. It's part of who I am. It's part of my identity, and I'm proud of it. However, for a lot of people, they go through and they spend a lot of time wondering, and late diagnosis is a huge thing. So, the final piece you asked about is how do we make that change? I'm a huge fan of disability awareness trainings, and this is not a matter of learning what it's like to be in someone's shoes. It's more of let's get you out of your comfort zone. Let's start making it harder to concentrate on a moment and have you do something that you think is normal, that you think is routine, I should say. Poor choice of the word normal. Something you think is routine. Let's have you picture a person with a cup of coffee. And does that person look like you? Does that person have a disability you don't have? Did it even occur to you? Let's start looking at the social impact of disability, where there are gross underemployment and unemployment rates for the community. And then in some countries, there are laws that either pay people with disabilities minimum wages, or perhaps there's laws that if they need personal care assistance or what have you, they can only make so much money. There's a lot of barriers out there. And the more we talk about them and understand them, the better we're going to be at addressing them. So first, I always suggest awareness. Second, if you have the opportunity to bring in speakers, there are fantastic speakers on out there. There's fantastic videos out there on this topic. Find some of those and share them. Again, I said sharing books. There's wonderful articles that are always being written by experts in the field all over. Share that information with your teams, with your groups, and get that conversation sparked.
It's what's interesting to me too is I'm listening to you is like I'm a child of the 80s and 90s, I guess. And, it was like the time where, oh, yeah, just suck it up, buttercup, right? I mean, it's even like when I played football, right? You see the helmet still behind me right there. Like people say to me today, how many concussions did you have? Did you have any concussions? And I said, I don't know, because we just sucked it up. Like we were just like, okay, like I'm still here, like we're moving forward. And so I wonder how much actually is because like there's still a lot of us, we're just like, we're just gonna ignore it. Like I'm just even let's stay with the lighting example. I
Yeah.
wonder how many people had close to that experience going in there and didn't say a word and just sucked it up and nobody ever knows. And then I go in and I say, oh my God. And people look at me like I'm crazy. They did, I mean, it wasn't horrible, but they also couldn't do anything because what are you going to do, right? If you're going to look at lights, that's where they are. But if only one person speaks up out of 10, then that person now has to overcome people going, well, why is this person bringing it up? Why are they being difficult? Do you know what I mean? So is that a thing or is that just my imagination?
It's not your imagination. And for the record, I'm Gen X too. Same idea. And there was a lot of things I was for years just trying to, if this is a me thing, I can make it work. I can deal with this. Um, it was a lot of that for me, and I know there's a lot of that for other people still who are. I don't want to be a bother. I'm afraid that if I say this, they'll I'll be forced to disclose more than I'm comfortable with. Um, so I don't want to do this because I'm afraid there'll be bias or barriers that I'll additional ones if I disclose. I am afraid of encountering, you know, different expectations should I ask for these things. Any number of reasons. Those things still exist. They're very real fears. and they're not unbased in anything. Like for you and I, it sounds like we had that similar mentality of we're tough, we can handle it. Um, when we were younger, and now that's becoming different. And there's things that we can learn from the way things are changing. I haven't finished reading the report. I know it was in a text help article, but I haven't finished reading the source of it. But it said something like more than 50% of Generation Z are identifying as neurodivergent. And that that reads true to me, because as we see that diagnostics are changing, acceptance is changing, more people are coming forward with their needs. We're still seeing people talking more. Today's World Mental Health Day. Seeing people talk more and more about what they need for their mental well-being in order to perform in work or to want to engage with brands. We're seeing more and more of this come up. I mean, do you see that change as well, or is that just me being very much into this world?
I see it in some pockets of society, and in other pockets, I still see some of the older traditional attitudes. And sometimes it's very, I don't know, subtle, hidden. You know what I mean? It's like people they would never admit it if you were to call them on it. But I do see a lot of people trying to make an effort as well. But then I do see this quite a bit when you bring up accessibility and people go, "Oh, we can't do that. Oh, we can't do this." And like they
It's
might
too
not
far.
say it quite the way I just said that, but that's basically how they say it. That's, you know what I mean? And so I think there's people who are trying, and then there's people who try to ignore it. And then there's people who maybe, honestly, maybe they actually don't get it or they didn't hear it correctly. I think it is important. I think there's people, they want to live in the black and white, right? Like it's either this or it's that, and there's no in between, right? And we all live in the grays. I mean, it's just kind of what we are. We're all going to run out of time in a minute here or so. So I do want to know. You focus on accessibility at Indeed. Why is there such an effort by Indeed to have somebody in your role working across and ensuring accessibility um, needs are met?
Well, for the record, there's several accessibility people throughout Indeed. I'm just marketing. That said, they do let me play in other sandboxes with them, and that's phenomenal whenever I have that opportunity. And the reason it's so important to us is, well, as it says behind me, we help people get jobs, and that's our focus. And we can't exclude people from that. We help all the people get jobs. This is our passion. This is what keeps us going. We all, I shouldn't say, I believe we all feel that the line we talk about a lot is better work leads to better lives. And for for me, with that gross underemployment and unemployment of this community, we need to help people with disabilities get jobs. And that starts with culture, that starts with marketing, that starts with products, that starts with us.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Donna, for joining us. And we're out.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe so you